She simply sat down on a bench to rest. But the patrol officers decided that she was suspicious and searched her in front of her neighbors. They did not know that she was the mother of the new deputy police chief. The video went viral and shook the entire city. Observe how one woman changed the system. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The sun had long dipped below the horizon when Viola James turned the corner onto Central Street. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and slightly uneven, one leg carrying the weight of the other with practiced rhythm. She had just come from Sunday evening service at New Hope Baptist, where the choir's final hymn still echoed somewhere in the back of her mind. The streets were quiet this time of night. Porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood, illuminating modest brick homes and cracked sidewalks. A warm breeze stirred the hem of her coat and fluttered the silk scarf tied neatly beneath her chin. In one hand, she carried a canvas shopping bag, the same one she'd used for nearly a decade. Inside were a half loaf of bread, 2 cans of okra, a carton of eggs cushioned by a dish towel, and a small bottle of lotion she liked from the dollar store. She'd made that stop after church, just before the store closed. She didn't think of herself as fragile. At 72, she still prided herself on her independence, lived alone in the same house she and her late husband had purchased in 1981. She cooked her own meals, went to church every Sunday, and walked most places unless her knees flared up or the weather turned. But tonight, the walk felt longer than usual. Her left knee ached more than it had in weeks. She paused at the bench outside a shuttered corner grocery, the kind with faded advertisements still stuck to the windows, and slowly lowered herself down. The bench was hard and cold beneath her, but the rest did her good. She adjusted the strap of her bag, folded her hands in her lap, and exhaled. Across the street, behind sheer curtains on the second floor of a recently renovated duplex, a woman named Bethany Crocker was watching. She had moved into the neighborhood just 6 months ago, preferring it to the rising rents closer to downtown Garland. Bethany didn't know Viola. She didn't know that the woman on the bench had walked these streets long before sidewalks were repaved or before any of the new families moved in. What Bethany saw instead was a hooded figure sitting alone under a flickering light. She thought of a news report she'd read earlier in the week about burglaries in neighboring towns. Her anxiety, poorly tethered on the best of days, spiked. She reached for her phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. She reported a suspicious elderly woman sitting on a bench and watching houses. She didn't say the woman was doing anything illegal. She didn't say she felt endangered, just that the presence seemed off and unfamiliar. The dispatcher took the call, noted the location, and dispatched a patrol car to investigate. By the time Bethany ended the call and peered back through her blinds, she felt satisfied she had done her civic duty. Viola was unaware of the report. She sat quietly, pressing her fingertips together, eyes scanning the sidewalk ahead. She could feel her heart slow after the walk, and she welcomed the brief stillness of the street. There were no voices, no car horns, just the occasional gust of wind rustling through magnolia trees. She remembered her husband's laugh, thought about what she might cook tomorrow, and briefly closed her eyes. It wasn't until she heard the low rumble of tires that she opened them again. Headlights brightened the pavement before her, and a patrol car pulled up to the curb with a soft groan of brakes. Another followed seconds later. The sudden presence of 2 marked vehicles pierced the silence. Viola blinked, unsure at first what drew them there. Then the doors opened. Officer Thomas Harper stepped out of the first car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy gray hair and a purposeful stride. His uniform was pressed, his belt organized. He looked like a man who liked control. From the second car emerged a younger officer, Lucas Vincent Thin, pale, fresh-faced with nervous energy clinging to his limbs. He closed his door with more force than necessary and adjusted the fit of his vest as he approached. Both men fixed their eyes on Viola. She remained seated, hands still in her lap. Her eyes moved between them calmly. She offered no greeting, only the patience of someone who had learned long ago that sometimes silence kept you safer. Thomas Harper scanned the area as though expecting backup that wasn't coming. He looked at the closed store, at the flickering streetlight, at the scarf on Viola's head. He did not smile. Lucas Vincent, trailing behind, held a tablet in his hand. Neither officer greeted her or asked how she was. Instead, Harper stepped closer, towering over the bench. Viola felt her stomach twist, not in fear, but in weariness. She had known this moment might come again, though it had been years. The assumptions, the rehearsed authority, the quick leap from presence to suspicion. Still, she raised her chin slightly. Harper asked for identification. Viola, slow from stiffness but steady in intent, reached for her coat pocket, removed her wallet, and handed him her ID. Lucas read the name aloud, then misspelled it into the tablet. Harper asked where she lived. Viola gave her address just 2 blocks away and mentioned her attendance at the nearby church. Neither man acknowledged the information. Instead, Harper gestured for her to stand. Viola hesitated. Her knee still ached, and she was seated legally on public property, having broken no law. Harper asked again, this time with a shift in tone. Viola stood. Lucas stepped forward and asked about her bag. Without waiting for consent, he took it gently from her hand, unzipped it, and began removing its contents. Bread, canned vegetables, a container of lotion. He examined each item with perfunctory disinterest before placing them on the bench. Viola watched without blinking. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Maria Ellis, a woman in her 60s, who had lived in the neighborhood even longer than Viola, stood on her stoop, arms crossed. She knew that scarf. She had seen Viola dozens of times at church picnics, community meetings, grocery runs. The sight of her being searched stirred something sharp in her chest. She stepped back inside, grabbed her phone, and returned with the camera already recording. Harper, now pacing slightly, spoke into his radio, requesting a check on Viola's ID. Lucas lingered by the bench, avoiding her eyes. Viola stood still. Viola. Her breathing remained even. She could feel the heat of the lights on her back, the weight of the attention on her skin. She wasn't trembling, but she could feel the old, familiar ache of being othered, of being mistaken for something she wasn't. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She had been taught by life and by experience that dignity was easier to protect in silence. When the search of her bag concluded, Lucas returned the items carelessly. Viola repacked them herself. Her fingers moved slowly but precisely, folding the towel over the eggs to cushion them again. Her phone, still in her pocket, buzzed once. She took it out and typed a short message to her son. Stopped by cops, Central and Willow. She did not add fear to the words, only facts. The message sent, she returned the phone to her pocket. Lucas noticed and flinched slightly, unsure whether to say something, but Harper waved him off. From across the street, Maria's voice could be faintly heard in her video. She lives right there, you idiots. That woman is no threat. Neither officer reacted. Viola resumed her seat. The bench felt harder than before, less like rest and more like containment. She could hear a dog barking in the distance. Another light turned on in a neighboring window. Her street, once hers, now felt foreign. The minutes crawled. The check came back clear. Harper frowned. Lucas scrolled through the call notes again, as if searching for justification. Then from the direction of Willow Avenue came the quiet approach of a dark SUV. It moved without urgency, but with unmistakable direction. Its headlights dimmed as it came to a stop behind the second patrol car. No siren, no flashing lights. Just the sudden presence of something different. Neither officer moved at first. Viola did not turn around. She recognized the vehicle by its shape, its sound, and the timing. She exhaled once, slowly. The moment was about to change. And everyone standing on that sidewalk, bathed in artificial light and assumptions, was about to realize that what they thought they saw was only the surface of something deeper. Something about to rise. The quiet hum of the SUV's engine was barely audible, yet it commanded more attention than the whine of radios or the scrape of boots on pavement. It rolled to a smooth stop behind the last patrol car, its headlights dimming as if intentionally avoiding spectacle. The officers turned almost in unison, their expressions shifting in small, telling ways. Harper, still pacing with the stiffness of someone used to control, narrowed his eyes and tilted his head slightly. Lucas stood still, tablet clutched in his hand, his jaw tightening with something between confusion and apprehension. Viola James remained seated. She had not flinched. She had not looked over her shoulder. There was no need. The familiar rhythm of the tires on pavement, the precision of the turn, and the absence of hesitation were all she needed. Her son had arrived. From the driver's side door, the figure of a tall man emerged. Terrence James, newly appointed deputy chief of the Garland Police Department, closed the door with a calmness that was neither dramatic nor casual. He wore no uniform. His dress shirt was crisp, sleeves rolled once at the wrist. A badge hung clipped to his belt, visible but not flaunted. His face was unreadable. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He walked forward with a deliberate pace that drew attention without demanding it. His gaze moved first to his mother, then to the officers. Viola met his eyes briefly. No words passed between them. Her silence was not from fear. It was the silence of knowing she didn't have to explain anything anymore. Harper was the first to respond, straightening his shoulders and clearing his throat. "Evening, sir," he said, the edge of surprise still clinging to his voice. Terrence offered no immediate reply. He stopped a few feet from Viola, looked her over from head to toe, and turned slightly toward the two officers. His eyes settled on Harper first, not with anger, but with a careful, almost clinical neutrality. Then to Lucas, whose hands were now empty, the tablet hastily tucked under one arm. There was a long moment of stillness. Harper spoke again, this time faster, more rehearsed. He explained that they had responded to a call, that the woman matched a description, that they were simply checking things out. Lucas nodded, trying to appear composed, though his shifting feet betrayed him. Neither man dared to interrupt once they started. Terrence listened without comment. He stood with his hands resting calmly at his sides. When Harper finished, Terrence asked the question that neither officer had expected. "Did you ask her name?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it. Harper glanced at his partner before responding with something vague about procedure and waiting for verification. Terrence's expression remained unchanged. He stepped closer to his mother. "Did she offer you her ID?" Harper muttered something about checking it now, claiming the information was still being verified. "And how long has she been sitting here?" Terrence's voice remained low and even. This time neither man answered. Across the street, Maria Ellis was still recording, though her hand had dropped to a lower angle. Her voice was no longer present on the video. She understood now that whatever was happening required quiet, not because it was delicate, but because silence would carry more weight than shouting ever could. Viola rose slowly, leaning slightly on the bench for support. Terrence reached out a hand, not to help her up, but simply to be there if she needed it. She stood fully, adjusted her coat, and held her bag close. Terrence gave her a small nod and gestured toward the SUV. No one stopped her. No one said a word. She walked toward the car with steady steps, each one heavier than the last, not from pain but from the gravity of what had just unfolded. Terrence followed behind, not in a rush, not with urgency, just presence. When she opened the passenger door and settled into the seat, he closed it gently behind her. He turned back once more to face the officers. The look he gave them was not one of fury. It was disappointment layered over restraint. It said more than any reprimand. He walked to the driver's side, stepped into the SUV, and drove away without looking back. The patrol lights blinked in the stillness, illuminating the empty space where she had sat. Harper shifted his weight, pulled his radio close, and muttered something into it. Lucas stood stiffly, eyes locked on the taillights until they disappeared around the corner. Maria stopped filming, but the story had already started. That night, the video made its way to Facebook, posted by Maria Ellis with a simple caption, "This is Ms. Viola. She lives 2 blocks from here. What they did to her was wrong." Within hours, it was shared across community pages, picked up by local activists, and sent to relatives in other cities. The comments began slowly, some expressing outrage, others sharing similar stories about their mothers, grandmothers, aunties. By midnight, the view count had reached 5 digits. By morning, it was on the local news. Viola did not sleep much that night. At home, she placed her groceries in the fridge with mechanical movements, washed her face in the dim light of her bathroom, and sat in the living room with a blanket over her legs. She didn't watch TV. The silence felt heavier than usual. It wasn't pain or fear that kept her awake. It was the weight of being reminded once again that dignity could be questioned at the edge of a sidewalk. Terrence stayed in the guest room that night. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He poured his mother a cup of tea and left it beside her chair. She didn't touch it. He sat across the room, watching her silhouette in the faint glow of the kitchen light. When she finally looked at him, she said nothing, and he understood that silence would be her shield for now. The next morning, the department buzzed, not out loud, but in texts, in glances, in quiet shuffles of feet down corridors. No official memo had been issued, but the video was already doing its work. It had no dramatic soundtrack, no narration, just shadows, uniforms, and the stillness of a woman sitting under a street lamp. Terrence arrived early. He walked past the reception desk without greeting. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone had seen it, or would. He walked into his office, shut the door, and turned off the overhead light. Then he watched the video again. Not as a deputy chief, not even as a police officer, as a son. He watched his mother sit still, hands folded, face lit by artificial light. He watched her belongings unpacked like contraband. He watched her eyes never waver. He watched himself enter, stand, speak. He paused the video on her face. He didn't feel shame. He felt resolve. He reached for a notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote a title at the top in all capital letters. Review. Stop and approach protocols. He underlined it twice. Across town, Lucas Vincent sat at his kitchen table, pale fingers wrapped around a lukewarm coffee cup. He had barely slept. He had seen the video too, watched it more than once. Harper hadn't returned his texts. His stomach felt hollow. He had never meant harm, he told himself. But intent and impact were different creatures, and the latter had already grown teeth. Maria Ellis, meanwhile, was receiving messages from strangers thanking her. Her phone rang 3 times that morning with requests for interviews. She declined them all. She wasn't looking for attention. She had simply pressed record. Viola spent the day indoors. She turned off her phone, left the blinds drawn, and sat with her memories. She wasn't surprised by what happened, only tired. Tired of being visible in all the wrong ways and invisible in all the right ones. By late afternoon, news vans appeared on her block. They parked at awkward angles, waiting. She didn't come out. She had said all she needed to by standing still. Terrence returned home just after sunset. He sat on the porch for a long time before entering. He listened to the sounds of the street children playing, a car horn, someone dragging a garbage bin. Life continued. He stood, walked inside, and found his mother in the same chair. She looked up briefly, then down again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The world had turned its gaze toward their home, and nothing about that evening could be undone. But the ripple had started, and no one could pretend otherwise anymore. The morning light filtered through the blinds with soft defiance, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor of Viola James's front room. She sat quietly in her armchair, wrapped in a faded floral shawl, her feet resting on a small cushion. Her tea had long gone cold. The cup sat untouched on the side table, next to a folded newspaper bearing her son's name on the front page. The article was short and cautiously written. It referred to her only as a local resident, and the incident as a routine street check. But the image embedded a screenshot from the now viral video spoke more truth than the words beside it. Her face, caught in a moment of stillness beneath the glare of the patrol car's spotlight, had traveled farther than her feet ever had. She had not asked for this attention, and she did not welcome it. But it had found her anyway. Terrence had already left for the station by the time Viola opened her eyes. He had moved through the house quietly, gathering his files, dressing in the half-light, not wanting to wake her. Before stepping out, he had paused by her chair, but she had remained still, feigning sleep. There were no words to share that morning, only silence, brittle and raw, stretching between them like taut wire. He had kissed her forehead gently, but she hadn't responded. At headquarters, the mood was neither loud nor hostile. It was something more insidious, a calculated quiet. Conversations stopped when Terrence walked into a room. The usual greetings turned into nods or glances. He noticed the change but did not acknowledge it. He kept his eyes forward, his steps steady, and made his way to his office with a folder full of incident reports from the last 12 months. His new mission was simple in theory, but immense in practice. Review every street stop involving Black residents over the age of 50 and cross-reference them with the complaint database. The deeper he looked, the clearer the pattern became. Not always aggressive, not always violent, but consistently rooted in assumption. Harper and Vincent were not disciplined, not yet. An internal review had been open, but procedural language padded every step. The department's public information officer had drafted a carefully neutral press release, framing the incident as a misunderstanding and assuring the public of their commitment to dignity and equality. Terrence read it twice before deleting it from his inbox without comment. Outside the station, the community's voice grew louder. The video of Viola's stop had sparked conversations that refused to be smothered. It played on local news loops and circulated on social media with captions that varied from outrage to disbelief. Hashtags bearing her name emerged on platforms she'd never heard of. Churches held prayer vigils, student groups drafted open letters, civil rights organizations called for transparency. But inside the walls of the Garland Police Department, fear began to outweigh accountability. Officers whispered in break rooms, shared theories in parking lots, avoided eye contact with Terrence in the elevator. Back at home, Viola kept her phone off. She didn't want to answer questions from well-meaning church members or distant cousins who had seen the video online. She didn't want to relive the indignity through their concern. She spent her days cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, organizing kitchen cabinets already in order, polishing picture frames from decades past. Each hour passed with mechanical routine. The world outside pulsed with her name, but inside her home, she retreated deeper into herself. Neighbors knocked on her door. Some brought flowers, others casseroles. She accepted them politely, thanked them softly, but offered no invitation to stay. Her house remained quiet. Her blinds stayed drawn. Even Maria, who had filmed the video, kept her distance. She understood that Viola needed space. Terrence felt the weight of her silence with every passing day. He came home late, often after dark, carrying work on his back like a burden he couldn't lay down. He watched the video each night, not out of obsession, but out of necessity. It reminded him what was at stake. This wasn't a political firestorm or a media crisis. This was his mother, humiliated under the system he had sworn to serve. And if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. A few days after the video reached its first 100,000 views, Terrence received a handwritten note slid under his office door. The paper was lined and folded twice, unsigned. The message was short but devastating in its clarity. We treat people like threats before we know their names. Not just your mother. I've seen it. I've done it. I'm tired of pretending I haven't. Terrence read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his desk drawer. It was the first honest thing he had received from within the department since the incident. That same day, Officer Trina Delgado knocked on his door. She stood tall and composed, hands behind her back, her voice steady. She asked to speak off the record. She told him she'd seen the video, said it made her think of her grandmother, of herself. She wanted to be part of any working group addressing street interaction protocols. She said it without fanfare, without asking for recognition, just conviction. Terrence nodded. She would be the first. He began to see signs of others paying attention. Small, careful signs. An officer hesitating before stopping someone. A rookie asking a supervisor about policy during roll call. A sergeant adjusting his language during a neighborhood patrol. Nothing revolutionary, but movement. Quiet, deliberate shifts. Still, Viola remained silent. Terrence tried once to ask if she wanted to talk. He brought her favorite cornbread from the diner near the station and left it on the kitchen table with a note. That evening, he found the note still there, untouched. The cornbread sat cold beside it. He didn't try again. Meanwhile, a city council member proposed a town hall meeting. The goal was to listen to community concerns, but the undercurrent was clear. They needed to defuse the pressure building in living rooms and classrooms and churches across Garland. Terrence was asked to attend. He refused. He had no interest in public theater. He wanted policies, not podiums. But the same day he came home to find Viola sitting at the dining table with the flyer in her hand. Her eyes met his briefly. Then she placed the paper down and stood. The next morning, she called the organizer herself. Word spread quickly that she would speak. There was no press release, no social media announcement, just word of mouth, carried neighbor to neighbor until the event hall had to request additional chairs. For the first time in days, Viola left the house without lowering her eyes. She walked with her shoulders back, her scarf tied neatly, and her hands folded in front of her like always. She was tired, but she wasn't done. That night, the city held its breath. The stage was small, the lighting poor, and the microphone slightly off-center. But when Viola James walked to the front of the room, every conversation fell silent. There were no introductions, no applause, just a room full of people waiting to hear from the woman who had been forced to remind the city of its blind spots. She looked out into the crowd and spoke without notes, without rehearsal, and without apology. And in doing so, she began something no badge, no camera, and no rank ever could. She made them listen. The folding chairs in the community center were not made for moments like this. They were thin and slightly crooked, their legs uneven on the old gymnasium floor. Yet every one of them was filled, and more people stood along the back wall and in the doorways. There were pastors and teachers, retired factory workers, students still in their uniforms, and mothers rocking infants in their laps. It wasn't the promise of spectacle that brought them out that night. It was the feeling that something was about to shift, that something fragile but necessary was being offered, not with a demand, but with an open hand. At the front of the room stood a small podium, slightly tilted, with a single microphone angled downward. Viola James stood just behind it, steady and quiet. The scarf around her head was pressed, her coat carefully buttoned. There was nothing loud about her presence, but the silence in the room was full of her. She didn't check notes or clear her throat. When the murmurs faded and only the hum of old fluorescent lights remained, she stepped forward and began. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't climb. It just filled the space as naturally as breath. She spoke plainly, not about statistics or policy, but about memory. She described what it meant to walk the same street for 40 years and still be seen as a stranger. She recounted that night in details that had not been captured on video. The cold edge of the bench, the sudden light, the way the younger officer held her bag as though expecting it to betray her. She spoke of dignity, not as an abstract ideal, but as something she had cultivated through decades of surviving systems that had rarely welcomed her. She didn't accuse. She didn't shout. But each word she spoke felt like a mirror held up to the city, and the reflection was hard to ignore. She said, "I've lived long enough to know when I'm not being seen for who I am, but for what someone fears I might be." And then she paused. Not for effect, but because she meant it. She continued, "I didn't ask to be in that video. I didn't ask for my face to be passed around like a warning. But maybe it needed to be, because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just going home." When she finished, the room did not erupt. It breathed. Then the clapping began, not a burst, but a slow rise, like people exhaling together after holding their breath too long. Viola stepped back, nodded once, and walked to her seat. Terrence was standing against the far wall, his eyes never leaving her. For a moment he looked not like a law enforcement officer, but simply a son who had watched his mother reclaim the space she had been pushed out of. The next day, a recording of the speech surfaced online. A high school teacher had filmed it from the third row, the camera angled slightly off, the sound imperfect. But it didn't matter. Her words carried. Within hours, the video was shared thousands of times. Quotes from her speech appeared on posters in classrooms, were painted on signs outside churches, and made their way into conversations around dinner tables. Local journalists picked up the story again, this time focusing not on the incident, but on what had followed. The conversation had changed course. At the department, the air remained uneasy. Some officers refused to speak about the event at all. Others dismissed it as media manipulation. But a growing number began to question themselves. It wasn't guilt exactly, but recognition, a crack in the wall. Terrence received another anonymous note. This one was shorter. "She was right. We just didn't want to see it." He continued his review of department protocols, filling binders with documentation, recommendations, and case studies from other cities. When the mayor's office reached out, requesting an outline for reforms, he was ready. He proposed 3 immediate actions: the mandatory use of body cameras during all civilian stops with no exceptions, the creation of a civilian oversight board composed of local residents, and a new unit focused entirely on community presence officers assigned not to respond, but to relate. The city council met in special session to review the proposals. The chambers were packed. Members of the public lined the back wall, holding photos of loved ones who had been stopped, questioned, or quietly humiliated. When the vote passed with overwhelming support, the applause that followed was quiet but resolute. Some officers resigned quietly in the days that followed. Others transferred out, but many stayed. Trina Delgado volunteered to lead a workshop at a local middle school, where she spoke to 8th graders about trust and power. Lucas Vincent, after weeks of silence, requested to join a peer-led training group on implicit bias. He didn't speak much during the first meeting, but he listened. That was a start. Back at home, Viola began to go outside again. She returned to her morning walks, her visits to the church, her quiet shopping trips. People stopped her more often now. Some offered hugs, others just nodded. One afternoon, a teenager on a bicycle slowed as he passed her and said, "Thanks for saying something." She hadn't planned to, but now that she had, she carried herself differently. On a warm afternoon, she stood at the corner of Central and Willow, waiting for the light to change. A patrol car rolled slowly by. Viola instinctively braced herself, but the window lowered, and a familiar face leaned out. It was Officer Vincent. He didn't say much, just, "How are you today, ma'am?" Viola studied his face. She didn't smile, but she nodded. "I'm all right." He nodded back, then drove on. At home, Terrence watched her from the porch as she returned from the store. She walked slower these days, but with purpose. She carried 2 bags and set them down on the steps before sitting beside him. They didn't speak at first. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the lawn. Finally, she looked at him. "Think it's really changing?" Terrence took a breath. "Some people are trying." She considered that. "That enough?" "No," he said, "but it's a start." They sat in silence again. Across the street, children rode scooters down the sidewalk, their laughter rising above the hum of a passing bus. Viola watched them, then said quietly, "It's not about me. Not really." Terrence looked at her. "It's about what happens after me. Who gets to walk down the street and be seen for who they are?" Terrence nodded. "You started something, Mama." She shook her head gently. "We did." A week later, the new oversight committee held its first public meeting. Among its 7 members were a retired school teacher, a paramedic, and a college sophomore who had spoken at the town hall. Their first agenda: review past complaints, meet with community liaisons, and begin designing a framework for trust. The newly formed community unit began walking neighborhoods, not in cars, not to respond to calls, but simply to be present. Officers stopped to greet shop owners, asked children their names, and answered questions without defensiveness. It was far from perfect, but it was movement. Terrence didn't speak to the media. He declined every invitation to appear on television, to speak at conferences, or to give keynote addresses. "I'm not here to polish the machine," he said once to the mayor. "I'm here to fix what's broken." At school, students were assigned an essay on justice. One young woman quoted Viola's speech. Another used the video as the basis for a media literacy project. A senior wrote his college application essay about it, entitled it, "What Dignity Really Means." The story faded from national headlines. Bigger stories rose: elections, storms, scandals. But in Garland, the echo remained. Not as noise, but as a low, steady hum inside classrooms, homes, and most importantly, inside the department itself. Some evenings, when Terrence walked past his mother's room, he would find her asleep with the television still on, her scarf resting on the armrest. He would turn off the volume, dim the light, and sit for a moment before leaving. He no longer watched the video. He didn't need to. It was no longer about what had been captured. It was about what came next, and that he knew was still being written. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives that matter. Click the bell icon so you don't miss the next one. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, share the video with someone today